Hello friends and welcome to Sustainable Prepping, your home for fear-free emergency preparedness and a sustainable life. Today I am bringing you along for one of my favorite things, which is a laundry chat where I fold real life laundry and we have real life conversations just like if you were over having a visit. So snuggle up, grab a beverage of your choice, and let's have a chat about vegetarianism and preparedness. Now, I talked in a recent video about how I was a vegetarian for 16 years. And I've talked about it on Instagram. I was vegetarian for a really long time. I was a vegan for 2 years out of that 16-year period. I was a pescatarian for a couple of years as I was transitioning into full vegetarianism. And I loved being a vegetarian. Some of the greatest benefits about being a vegetarian was that I ate a really wide variety of foods. It introduced me to a lot of Indian foods and curries, and my variety of fruits and vegetables, particularly the kinds of vegetables that I was eating, the kinds of protein sources I was eating, were so wide and varied. I truly was, eating the rainbow, as nutritionists encourage us. And it was a very healthful way of living. I had super low cholesterol, and I've always had low blood pressure. I had better time managing my weight and things like that. So it was a very positive season of my life. However, as you saw, those of you who saw my video where I was canning chicken recently, I got really sick. And I have an intestinal chronic illness that's had a bunch of different diagnoses. None have stuck. But it's similar to Crohn's disease without the other inflammatory stuff. It's just a gut disease that sometimes is incredibly, incredibly painful, debilitatingly painful. And I have absorption problems because of it. And the only cure that I was able to try after trying a year of different medications and diets and FODMAP and low glycemic index, low fiber, all the different things, was I tried chicken broth. And that collagen-rich homemade chicken broth healed my guts, and that opened the door to me eating. Now, I was not a vegetarian purely on ethical grounds. I do believe that there are absolutely ways in which raising and slaughtering and consuming animals can be ethical. A wolf doesn't feel guilty for eating a deer because it's a necessary part of survival. And I know the vegetarian comeback is it's not necessary for humans. We absolutely can survive without meat, so why do we do it? I know both sides of the argument. But for me, it wasn't about the ethicalness of the consumption of animals. It was how animals in our modern Western society are raised, and the fact that it's inhumane for the animal, it's inhumane for the workers, it's inhumane for the planet. The slaughtering process is horrific, and I don't want to participate in all that awfulness, and it is terrible. I mean, it really is. Where was I? I was interrupted, so now I have to remember where I was. I am not opposed to the eating of meat. I think it can be ethically done. I think indigenous communities have ethically eaten meat in every corner of the globe, and they can teach us better ways to steward our meat consumption. But our current farming practices around particularly large animals and chickens, it's just very inhumane, and I don't want to participate in that. Fast forward 15, 16 years, and there is not just the rise of regenerative agriculture, but access. The internet has given us access so that we can link up to these regenerative farmers who maybe can't afford to get their product into stores, who maybe are not just down the road from us, but across the country, and yet we can buy wholesale, we can buy in bulk. There's Butcher Box, there's other organizations like that. I bought chicken from Farmhouse on Boone. Her sister has a farm, and I bought a box of chicken from them one year. It was great. It was a little pricier than I could afford, but it was a very high quality product. I've bought a half a cow from a local CSA, and so what has happened is that the internet has allowed for people like me, and probably people like you, who want to have an ethical source of meat and who are maybe willing to have less meat consumption overall in order to have that higher quality meat, and who want to support farms that are doing what's right. And so, okay, here's where I'm standing, right? This is sort of a preamble, if you will, to the deeper conversation about vegetarianism and preparedness. Because while you might think I have one particular view on it, I think it's more complicated. I think that if you are approaching your dietary needs from a preparedness standpoint, you have to be an omnivore. You have to be an omnivore because you have to be capable of digesting any food that is available come a crisis, all right? And so if we're thinking strictly from an emergency preparedness mindset, you must be an omnivore. It doesn't mean you have to eat meat and animal proteins regularly, like every day, or even, multiple days of the week, but your body has to maintain the enzymes to digest animal proteins. And the longer you are a strict vegetarian, the longer you are a vegan, you lose the digestive enzymes for digesting animal products. When I stopped being a vegan after just shy of 2 years, I think I was like 21 months as a vegan, I had to slowly introduce dairy yogurt to get the bacterial cultures. I still had some inflammation and cramping. It went away within a couple of weeks, but it was very uncomfortable for those couple of weeks. And if we're talking about an emergency situation, we may not have that time to go through that process. So if you are strictly looking at diet from the perspective of emergency preparedness, your diet needs to include animal proteins regularly enough that you continue to cultivate the microbiome that can healthfully process meat, dairy, eggs, okay? So that's one side of it, all right? That's a very real side of it that we need to be talking about. But that is not the only side of the issue, because you might be hearing me say, okay, eat as much meat as you want, and meat is great, and we should just have all the animal products all the time. But that is not exactly what I'm saying. Because the other side of it is we also need to be cultivating and practicing meatless eating. There will be a time, major SHTF situation or not, when meat is going to go back to a relative cost that it used to be. If you go back and you read historical accounts, unless you were literally growing meat, you are a farmer growing meat, okay? Meat was expensive. Some communities had like a chicken or a roast on Sunday. It was their big Sunday dinner. And then they would stretch it and have something with that meat on Monday. And maybe they would use broth, or they'd make a bone broth for Tuesday. And then Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday might be vegetarian, right? Might have eggs or dairy as a part of those meals, but you wouldn't necessarily have meat. And I think we need to be mentally preparing for a return to that style of eating. You might not have it that extreme, but you might need to be, eating full vegetarian 3 days a week, right? 3 days a week. Imagine that. Do you eat vegetarian ever? Is the closest thing you get to vegetarian eating a cheese pizza? Can you make hearty, filling meals without meat, without dairy, and without eggs, right? This is being vegan. Do we have an ability to do that? And so on the other side of it, right, the side that the average prepper perhaps is less excited about is that in the future, for all of us, as climate change continues to change how our agricultural systems function, yes, we need large animals like cows and bison for the health of the planet. That is true. We absolutely should have sustainable sources of small scale animals like chickens and rabbits and quail. For example, fish that are, you can have fish that are farmed without them being farmed fish, if that makes sense. You can sustainably manage fishing. I mean, the indigenous community did that for centuries before we arrived. we're going to need to do that, right? We're going to need to learn how to use legumes and grains to make complete proteins. But this idea that you must choose one or the other, meat every day or no animal products at all, is such a reflection of our polarized culture's inability to find middle ground. I met somebody once who said that he identified as a crossroads, that one of his daily prayers was to be a crossroads. I don't identify as a crossroads. I identify as a bridge. My entire life, I have been a bridge between communities, between friend groups, between cliques, between people with conflicting political points of views, people with different religious points of views. I have a deep background in interfaith work, people in conflict. I believe in that my life is meant to be a bridge. And that's why I have this channel, because I want to bridge the gap for folks who are either really into emergency preparedness and want to hear from a progressive standpoint that approach, or people who are terrified of the preparedness stuff but want to do kind of sustainable living, and building that bridge between folks without the political rhetoric that can derail meaningful conversation. And the same is true when we think about omnivores versus vegetarians. Be a bridge. Be a bridge. Find the gray. If you're a vegetarian now, I want you to deeply consider, what's your threshold for eating meat? Seriously, what's your threshold? Is there ever a time you'll eat meat? How hungry do you have to be? And what are you doing to prepare yourself for that? I'm not saying stop being a vegetarian. I think that there's really ethical, wonderful, beautiful things about being a vegetarian. But what if? What if, right? What if things go really badly and you're invited to go and eat with someone and they have backyard chickens and they've just made a giant vat of chicken soup, right? Where they've got bone broth, they've cooked and cooked and cooked, and they've got a little bit of chicken in there with a ton of noodles and veggies and whatever. Are you gonna say no? Is your body going to reject the animal proteins? I think we have to think about it, because the flip side of it is, if you eat all the meat, you do all the animal proteins, woohoo, right? Good on you, you're building your muscle. I eat way more animal protein right now because I'm in a process of trying to put on muscle and lift weights, and I'm eating a lot of animal protein. Is my body going to be able and familiar with legumes so that when I'm eating all that rice and beans, my body doesn't absolutely lose its mind because of the high fiber content? Do I know how to deal with the anti-nutrients that are encased, that our legumes are encased in, that make them hard to digest, that can actually strip nutrients from my intestines? Do I know the process of nixtamalization, I think that's how you say it, for making dried corn edible? Do we have all these processes down? We gotta have both. You have to have both pieces. There will be a time when meat will be scarce. You can't just go trap every squirrel and deer. I mean, we know that squirrels and deer were hunted almost to extinction during the Great Depression because people were so hungry. So we know that those things could happen. They are absolutely possibilities, and we know that climate change will force us to change our lifestyles, particularly around the consumption of animal products. How are we going to manage it? Not everybody's going to move to their 40-acre homestead. There isn't enough land in the United States for every family to move to a 40-acre homestead. There's not enough arable land. There isn't. Cities will always exist. Cities have always existed in the United States. Boston, right? New York, they've always been shipping harbors that were essential to the development of our nation. Not just the agrarian, pastoral mythos we tell ourselves. There was an urban center and they worked together. So how are we going to manage that? How are you going to make your choices about vegetarianism, omnivorism, veganism that are going to set you up for success? And do you need to have a plan in place for changing your diet if things get really bad? I want to be bringing this up because I think there's a lot of people who this would blindside them. This would be that car merging, and you don't see them and they T-bone you. And I don't want that to happen. If you're a happy vegetarian or a happy vegan, that's awesome. And as a vegetarian for 16 years, it's a wonderful way to live and a really great way to eat a variety. There's very helpful ways to have both of those lifestyles. But I want to challenge you. What happens if food gets scarce and meat is something that can get you really calorie dense protein and nutrients? Is there a threshold in which you would start eating meat? Seriously, what is that threshold? And what do you need to have on hand in your preps to help you digest that meat, particularly if you're vegan, right? If you're vegetarian and you're eating eggs and you're eating a bit of dairy, you'll have enough animal proteins that you might not have the same kind of gastrointestinal distress because those enzymes should still be present even if they're small. But if you're vegan, you're gonna lose them after a couple of years. So what do you need to have on hand? Do the research, figure it out. If you are an omnivore and you eat a lot of meat, are you practicing eating large volumes of legumes? I mean, large volumes. I'm not talking about one burrito a week. I'm talking about, can you eat 2, 3, 4 meals a week with legumes and grains? Is your body prepared to do that? If you've been on keto for 3 years, you can't be keto during SHTF, my friends. You cannot do it. We can't store that much fat. Fat is one of the most important nutrients, and it's so scarce that this is why people started eating meat in the first place. So what are you gonna do? Can you start that transition now so that you are already practiced? You know how to feed yourself? I just worry. These fad diets, I worry that they're setting us up for failure. And I want you to be prepared. So as you consider, I want you to consider vegetarianism, veganism, omnivorism. How are you going to be flexible in the face of disaster? What's your threshold for changing your diet? And what are you doing to be prepared when that change needs to happen? This is important. I'd love to know what you're gonna be doing. Let me know in the comments. Tell me right now, are you vegetarian, vegan, or an omnivore? And what's your threshold for changing your diet? How are you practicing? If you eat meat, eating less meat, so you're practicing with your dried legumes, you're practicing eating a variety of perhaps fruits and vegetables that aren't at the top of your list, but could be plentiful during a disaster. If you're vegetarian or vegan, how are you going to be planning to potentially incorporate meat in a disaster? Do you have a plan? Is that something you're considering? What is your threshold? And how are you practicing with all of that now? These are real issues, and I'd love for us to be talking about them. As always, continue the conversation with me down in the comments. You can also talk to me over on Instagram at sustainable_prepping and the Facebook group. Y'all, I hope you all are doing well. I'm almost at the end of this cold, so I'll be excited when that is over. And until the next video, happy prepping.